There is a version of you that has never spoken. It does not ask for permission. It does not wait to be invited. It does not flinch when the world gets cold, and it does not apologize when the room gets quiet after it walks in. This version of you has been locked in a basement you built yourself, bricked up with manners you were taught, with smiles you practiced, with nods you gave to people you secretly despised. You sealed it down there with your own hands and called that imprisonment civilization. You called it maturity. You called it growth. But late at night, when everything goes still and the masks come off and the performance of your daily life finally ends, you hear it. A sound, low, steady, patient as stone. Something down there is still breathing. This is the story of a man named Elias. Elias was 34 years old when he realized he had never once in his life frightened anyone. Not in the way that matters, not in the way that signals to the world that there is a depth behind the eyes, a weight behind the presence, a cost to crossing certain lines. He was pleasant, he was available, he returned calls quickly, he agreed often, he laughed at jokes he found stupid, he said no problem so frequently that it had become the unofficial slogan of his existence, 2 words that together meant, I will absorb whatever you give me and ask for nothing in return. He was a doormat who had learned to stand upright. He had a good job, a decent apartment, friends who called him reliable, which is what people say about someone when they cannot think of anything more interesting. He dated women who left him not for dramatic reasons, not in fights, not in fury, but in that slow, suffocating drift that happens when one person realizes the other has no direction strong enough to create any kind of gravity. They just floated away from him like untethered balloons, and he stood there watching them go, nodding slightly as if it made sense, as if he had no opinion on the matter. He had no idea who he was. Not really. He knew his job title, he knew his schedule, he knew his preferences in coffee and the names of the podcasts he listened to and the kind of movies he said he liked when someone asked. But who he actually was, what he was made of at the level beneath all the performances and accommodations and polite agreements, that he could not tell you. Until the night everything changed. He was walking home late from a dinner party, the kind he attended out of obligation, where he spent 4 hours laughing at things he did not find funny and agreeing with opinions he did not hold. It was raining, not the soft, cinematic kind of rain that feels like permission to feel things. The cold, indifferent kind that soaks through your jacket in 30 seconds and reminds you that nature has no interest in your comfort. He turned a corner and stopped. There was a man blocking the sidewalk, not large, not threatening in any conventional sense, just standing there looking at his phone, taking up the entire walkable space with the specific energy of someone who had never once considered that other people existed. Elias started to do what he always did. He started to walk around, to move himself out of the other man's way, to subtract himself from the equation so that the equation could continue uninterrupted. But something stopped him, something old, something he had not heard in a very long time. It came from below, from a basement he had sealed, and it said very quietly, with a patience that was somehow more terrifying than rage, "Do not move." Elias stopped. He stood in the rain. He waited. The other man looked up from his phone, slightly annoyed, slightly confused by the obstacle, and then, for reasons he probably could not name, he moved. It lasted 4 seconds. The whole thing lasted 4 seconds. Nothing happened. No words were exchanged. No conflict occurred. Just a man standing still in the rain while the world arranged itself around him for the first time in his life. But those 4 seconds cracked something open, because Elias stood there in the rain after the man walked past, and he realized he was shaking, not from fear, not from cold, but from something he had not felt in so long he had almost forgotten it had a name. He felt real. What you are about to read is not a self-help book in the way you have been sold self-help before. There will be no list of morning habits. There will be no 6-step framework with an acronym. There will be no cheerful encouragement to visualize your best self or practice gratitude in a journal decorated with geometric patterns. What this is is a reckoning. It is the thing that happens when a man stops running from his own depth and turns around to face it. It is the process of excavating what was buried, not because it was dangerous, but because other people found it inconvenient. It is the reconstruction of a self that was dismantled piece by piece over years of accommodation, approval-seeking, and the slow, quiet terrorism of trying to be liked by everyone. There is something inside you that is not gentle, not because it is evil, but because it is true. And truth in a world built on comfortable lies is the most dangerous thing there is. By the end of this, you will understand what that thing is. You will know where it went, and you will know exactly how to call it back. Not to destroy, to become. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The animal you were before they trained you. Before you had language, you had instinct. Before you had social skills, you had survival. Before you had a personality shaped by schools and families and the approval of strangers, you had something raw and true and entirely your own. Something that knew how to want without apology, how to refuse without explanation, how to move through the world with the specific gravity of a creature that has never been told to make itself smaller. Then the training began. Understand this clearly. The training was not malicious. The people who performed it loved you, most of them. They gave you rules and rewards and punishments and feedback loops, and they shaped you the way a river shapes stone, not with violence, but with constant, patient, relentless pressure applied in the same direction over a very long time. They were trying to make you socially functional. They were trying to make you safe. They were trying to give you the tools to exist in a world that does not tolerate too much rawness. The problem is that in the process of making you safe, they made you small. And small is not the same thing as good. Small is not the same thing as kind. Small is not the same thing as evolved. Small is simply small, a diminished version of a thing that was once complete. Think back. Not to a specific memory necessarily, but to a feeling. The feeling you had as a very young child before self-consciousness arrived, before you started watching yourself from the outside and calculating how you appeared to others. There was a time when you cried when you were sad, with no strategy attached to the crying. There was a time when you wanted what you wanted with your whole body, when desire was clean and unconflicted and completely unapologetic. There was a time when you pushed back against things that were wrong with a pure, uncomplicated fury that had no PR strategy behind it. That is not childishness. Do not be confused. That is aliveness, and somewhere along the way, you traded aliveness for acceptability. Here is what happened, specifically. Because vagueness is a luxury we cannot afford in this conversation. The first time you expressed strong anger and were told it was inappropriate, you learned that your anger was a liability. Not that anger could be expressed more skillfully, that it was inherently dangerous to display. The first time you were too loud and the room got uncomfortable, you learned that taking up too much space was wrong. The first time you wanted something intensely and were made to feel greedy or difficult for wanting it, you learned to want quietly or to pretend you did not want at all. The first time you said something true that hurt someone's feelings and the entire social consequence fell on you rather than on the truth, you learned that honesty was expensive and silence was cheap. Multiply these moments by thousands. Spread them across your entire childhood and adolescence and early adulthood. Let them calcify into unconscious beliefs that you carry in your body rather than your mind. And what you get is a man who has learned to be acceptable at the cost of being actual, a performance. A very convincing one, perhaps, but a performance nonetheless. Now here is where it gets complicated, because the world will tell you that what I am describing is dangerous. They will say, the animal inside you is the problem. They will say, your rawness is what needs to be managed. They will build entire systems of psychology and social philosophy designed to convince you that the thing inside you that resists total accommodation is pathology rather than signal. Do not believe it. Not all of it. Yes, the unprocessed version of the animal can be destructive. Yes, the raw, unexamined instinct running without wisdom or restraint causes damage. This is not an argument for impulsive aggression or emotional incontinence or the kind of performed toughness that men who are actually terrified of themselves mistake for strength. This is an argument for something far more difficult: integration. The animal and the architect together, the instinct and the intelligence, the fire and the hands that know how to hold it. This is not about becoming less civilized. It is about becoming more complete. It is about reclaiming the parts of yourself that were not actually dangerous, just inconvenient to others, and building something out of all of yourself rather than only the approved parts. Think of it this way: a river that is fully dammed does not become safe, it becomes still. And still water, given enough time, becomes stagnant. It loses its oxygen. Things stop living in it. The stillness that looks like peace from the outside is actually a slow death from the inside. The men you have met who feel truly alive, not the loud ones, not the performatively aggressive ones, but the ones who carry something in them that you cannot quite name, the ones who make you feel like you are in the presence of something actual. Those men have not killed their inner animal. They have trained it. They have formed a relationship with it that is collaborative rather than suppressive. They are not fighting themselves. They are complete. That is what this is about. Not releasing the beast carelessly into your life and calling it authenticity, forming a relationship with what is actually inside you, learning to hear it, learning to translate it, learning to use it. Elias, standing in the rain, did not unleash anything violent. He did not confront anyone. He did not perform toughness. He simply refused for 4 seconds to subtract himself from his own space on this planet. And the world moved around him. That is the beginning. That is what it feels like when the animal inside you is not being suppressed. Not rage, not confrontation, just the specific, unmistakable weight of a person who is fully inhabiting themselves. You had that once. We are going to find out what it takes to get it back. Chapter 2: The Architecture of Weakness. How you were built to comply. There is a blueprint inside you that you did not design. It was drawn up over years by dozens of hands, using the materials of your fear and your love and your hunger for belonging. It is a structural plan for a specific kind of person, one who accommodates easily, offends rarely, requires little, accepts much, and moves through life in the smooth, frictionless way of something that has learned to take up exactly as much space as others are comfortable giving it. You are living in a building you did not commission, and the first step to rebuilding is understanding, in precise and unflinching detail, exactly how the original structure was constructed. There are 5 foundational mechanisms, 5 ways that weakness is installed in a person, not through cruelty, not through hatred, but through the ordinary, well-intentioned machinery of social formation. Understand these 5 mechanisms clearly, and you will begin to see not just why you are the way you are, but exactly where the renovation needs to happen. The first mechanism is conditional approval. From the very beginning of your life, love and approval were not constants. They were variables. They went up when you behaved in certain ways and down when you did not. This is not necessarily conscious cruelty. It is simply how most humans parent, teach, and relate to one another. The smile when you were good, the disappointment when you were difficult, the warmth when you complied and the coldness when you resisted. And you, being the intelligent organism you are, read the pattern immediately. You learned that love has conditions, that approval must be earned and maintained, that who you are, in your raw and unfiltered form, is not quite enough, but who you perform yourself to be can be. This is the installation of what we might call the approval addiction, a deep cellular level hunger for external validation that functions exactly like a drug dependency. When it is supplied, you feel safe. When it is withheld, you feel a panic that is entirely disproportionate to the actual situation, but entirely proportionate to what your nervous system has been trained to expect. You pursue it not because you want to, but because your entire neurological reward system has been calibrated to need it. The result: a man who makes decisions based not on his own values and desires, but on what is most likely to produce approval. a man who says yes when he means no, because the internal discomfort of disappointing someone has become more unbearable than the external discomfort of betraying himself. The second mechanism is the pathologizing of anger. Anger is not a character flaw. Anger is information. It is the body's way of signaling that something important has been violated, a boundary, a value, a fundamental expectation of respect or fairness. Anger is the alarm system. It exists to tell you that something is wrong. But most men were taught, through correction, punishment, social consequence, and sometimes genuine fear in the people around them, that anger itself was the problem, not the situation that caused it, not the violation that provoked it. The anger. So what happens? You learn to disconnect from the signal. You learn to suppress the alarm when it fires. You learn to reframe violations as non-events, to tell yourself it was not a big deal, to find reasons why the person who crossed your line was probably right and you were probably overreacting. You become an expert at self-gaslight, at talking yourself out of your own perception in real time, before anyone else even has to do it for you. And then, 20 years later, you sit in a therapist's office and say you do not know what you want. You do not know what matters to you. You have trouble identifying your feelings, and you wonder why. Your feelings were not lost. They were trained out of you. The anger, specifically, was removed, and with it went the whole information system that tells a person what they value, what they need, where their lines are, and what they are willing to defend. A man without access to his anger is a man without a compass. He can be pointed in any direction because he has no internal north. He is endlessly manipulable because the system designed to resist manipulation has been disabled. The third mechanism is the social cost of difference. Belonging is not a luxury. For a human being, belonging is oxygen. We evolved as tribal creatures in environments where exclusion from the group meant death, literal, physical death from cold and predators and starvation. The need to belong is not a weakness or a vanity. It is a survival imperative wired so deep into your nervous system that it operates far beneath conscious thought. And difference, from an early age, carries a social cost. Not always, not everywhere, but enough of the time in enough of the environments most people grow up in that the lesson gets learned. Being different is expensive. Being too much of yourself, too loud, too opinionated, too strange, too certain, too unwilling to adapt, gets you excluded, gets you mocked, gets you left out, gets you labeled as difficult, arrogant, antisocial, or simply wrong. So you sand yourself down, you find the edges that create friction, and you file them smooth. You learn which parts of yourself are welcome and which are not, and you leave the unwelcome ones in the car when you go inside. You become a skilled editor of your own authentic expression, cutting the parts that do not test well with your audience, until what you present to the world is a version of yourself that has been specifically engineered to produce acceptance, efficient, effective, and utterly devastating to your sense of self over time. The fourth mechanism is the false equation of softness with virtue. At some point, through religion, culture, family, or some combination, you were given an equation. The equation says, a good person is a gentle person. A good person does not take up too much space. A good person puts others first. A good person is humble, and humble means quiet, and quiet means small. This equation is not entirely wrong. Gentleness is genuinely valuable. Humility is genuinely important. The problem is when these qualities are redefined, when humility becomes self-erasure, when gentleness becomes spinelessness, when putting others first becomes a permanent abandonment of yourself that is dressed up in the language of virtue so that you cannot reject it without feeling like you are rejecting goodness itself. This is the trap, because now your weakness has moral protection. Now every time you feel the impulse to stand up for yourself, to take what you need, to be difficult, to resist, you do not just feel social pressure. You feel guilt. You feel like a bad person. Your own ethical framework has been weaponized against your self-preservation. The fifth mechanism is the removal of initiation. In almost every traditional human society throughout history, there existed some version of an initiation process, a rite of passage, in which a young man was deliberately taken to his edge, stripped of comfort and certainty, and forced to discover what he was made of. Not so that he could show off, but so that he could know himself, so that he could stop being a boy, a creature who needs to be told what he is, and become a man, a creature who knows. Modern civilization has largely eliminated these processes. What replaced them is a kind of extended adolescence, a decades-long period in which a person is technically adult but has never been tested, never been broken open, never been forced to stand alone in the dark, with nothing but themselves, and find out whether that is enough. The result is men who at 30, 40, 50 years old still do not know who they are at the level that matters, who have never had to find out, who have lived their entire adult lives in the warm middle temperature of managed comfort, accommodating and agreeable and deeply, profoundly uncertain of their own substance. These five mechanisms together build the architecture of a man who is, in the deepest sense, not yet himself. Not a bad man, not a stupid man, not an unlovable man, just an incomplete one. And you cannot complete yourself without first understanding the blueprint you are working with, without seeing clearly and without flinching exactly how you were constructed to comply. Now you see it. The next question is, what do you build instead? Chapter 3. The dangerous truth about nice men. There is a particular kind of man that the world says it wants: considerate, agreeable, supportive, emotionally available, conflict-averse, easy to be around. He asks how you are feeling and remembers what you said last week, and never raises his voice, and never takes up too much space in a room, and never makes anyone uncomfortable with the specificity of his desires or the inconvenience of his boundaries. He is described as a good man. He is also frequently a man in quiet crisis. Let us talk about the dangerous truth of niceness. Not because nice is bad, but because most of what gets called nice is not actually nice. It is fear wearing the mask of virtue. It is the survival strategy of a person who learned early that direct expression of self was dangerous, and who constructed an entire personality around the avoidance of that danger. And here is why this matters beyond the individual man. Performed niceness is not actually kind to the people around it. Consider what it means to be in a relationship of any kind, friendship or romance or professional, with a man who is constitutionally incapable of disagreement, who mirrors your preferences back at you, who says yes reflexively, who makes himself so agreeable that you can never quite find him in the room. At first, this feels like compatibility. At first, it feels like ease. But over time, something starts to feel wrong in a way that is hard to name. You realize there is no one home. When you make a decision together, you are not actually making it with someone, you are making it with your own reflection. When you have a fight, you are not actually fighting with a person who holds ground. You are fighting with someone who collapses into apology so quickly that the fight becomes meaningless. You feel the specific loneliness of being with someone who will not show you themselves, and you confuse it with being unwanted, when actually what it is the loneliness of wanting someone who has made themselves unavailable by making themselves invisible. The nice man is not kind. The nice man is absent. Now here is the deeper cut. The thing beneath the surface that is harder to look at directly. Most nice men are not nice because they feel genuinely benevolent toward the world. They are nice because they are afraid. They are managing other people's emotions compulsively because they are terrified of what happens when someone is unhappy with them. They are agreeable because the thought of disagreement activates something in them that feels like danger, and this is not metaphor, this is physiology. The nervous system of a person who was shaped by conditional approval literally experiences conflict as threat. The body responds with cortisol and adrenaline, and the same physiological cascade it would produce if a predator were nearby. So the niceness is not a choice. It is a coping mechanism. And coping mechanisms, by definition, are not about living. They are about surviving. There is a word for this in modern psychology: people-pleasing. But that phrase is too soft, too cuddly, too easily dismissed as a minor personality quirk. Let me give you a different name for it: self-abandonment. That is what it is. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you abandon yourself. Every time you swallow a true opinion to avoid discomfort, you abandon yourself. Every time you make your wants smaller, your feelings quieter, your presence less so that someone else can be more comfortable, you abandon yourself. And you cannot do this without cost. The cost is paid in the currency of selfhood, which means the more you do it, the less of you there is. This is not sustainable, and something in you knows it. Something low and old and patient knows that the nice man routine is eating you alive from the inside, even as it smiles and nods and says, of course, whatever works for you. Here is what the research on this confirms, if you need it confirmed. Chronically agreeable people, those who consistently suppress their own desires and prioritize others' approval, show higher rates of anxiety, depression, resentment, physical illness, and what psychologists call identity diffusion, the loss of a coherent sense of who you are. They also tend to accumulate resentment that they cannot express because they have built a personality around not expressing uncomfortable feelings, and resentment with no exit becomes the slow poison of every relationship it inhabits. The nice man is suffering, and the suffering eventually finds its way out. Not cleanly, not directly, not in ways that can be addressed, because the nice man has become expert at not addressing things directly. It comes out sideways, in passive aggression, the withholding, the subtle sabotage, the quiet refusal wrapped in plausible deniability, in sudden, inexplicable explosions after months of accumulated pressure that has nowhere to go, in the quiet withdrawal from life, the slow dimming of ambition and engagement that looks from outside like depression and feels from inside like the particular exhaustion of having performed yourself for decades. None of this is who you are. None of this is your nature. This is what was built over your nature. This is the architecture from the previous chapter, in action, in a real human life. So what is the alternative? Because here is where people get confused. They hear "stop being so nice," and they think the prescription is to become brutal. They think the alternative to accommodation is aggression, that the alternative to agreeable is hostile, that the only option besides soft is hard. This is a false binary, and it is one of the most damaging ones in contemporary male culture. The alternative to performed niceness is not performative toughness. It is authenticity. It is the specific, difficult, gradual process of learning to express what is actually true, not to hurt people, not to dominate, but because truth is the only currency that builds anything real. A man who tells you clearly what he wants and does not want is not being unkind, he is being present. A man who maintains his position in a disagreement is not being aggressive, he is being someone. A man who can say no without 15 minutes of apologetic scaffolding is not being difficult. He is having a relationship with you in which the boundaries are real, which means the consent is real, which means the connection is real. Authentic presence is not dangerous. It is deeply, fundamentally, foundationally kind, in a way that niceness never was. Chapter 4. Reclaiming your anger. The sacred fire you were told to put out. Let us talk about anger, not the ugly kind, not the kind that is really fear in a loud costume, not the kind that punches down, not the tantrums of men who have confused losing control with having power. That kind of anger is not what we are discussing, and it is not what we are calling back. We are talking about the other kind, the deep kind, the kind that knows, the kind that arrives not in a storm, but in a specific, clarifying stillness that says, "This is wrong, and I know it is wrong, and I will not pretend it is not." That anger is not a problem to be managed. That anger is a map. Let me tell you what anger actually is at the level of biology before the culture gets its hands on it. Anger is an orientation response. It is the body's way of directing the self towards something that has violated a fundamental expectation, a boundary, a value, a need for fairness or safety or respect. It is at the neurological level a form of attention, the body saying, "Look here, this matters. This requires a response." Anger does not arrive randomly. Anger arrives at violations. And what this means, and this is important enough to read twice, is that the things that make you angry tell you with almost perfect precision what you care about. Your anger is a direct readout of your values. A man who has lost access to his anger has lost access to his values. He does not know what matters to him because the alarm system that points toward what matters has been disconnected. He wanders through his life making decisions by committee, by consulting what others want, what is socially appropriate, what will minimize conflict, because he has no internal compass to consult. His anger, which would have been his compass, is gone, and he is lost. He is pleasant and he is lost. This is not a minor inconvenience. A man who does not know what he values cannot make real choices. He can make performances of choices. He can select from menus, declare preferences in coffee and film genres and vacation destinations. But the deeper choices, the ones about how he will spend his life and who he will be and what he will stand for and what he will refuse, those require a self with convictions. A self with convictions requires a self that knows what it cares about. A self that knows what it cares about has access to the signal that fires when something it cares about is threatened. That signal is anger. So when someone trained your anger out of you, when the message, delivered 1,000 times in 1,000 ways, was that your anger was inappropriate, excessive, dangerous, unwelcome, what they were actually removing was your moral compass, your orientation system, your ability to know where you stand. They thought they were teaching you to be civilized. What they were actually doing was making you navigable by others. Now, how do you get it back? The first thing to understand is that the anger has not gone anywhere. It cannot. Emotions do not disappear when suppressed. They metabolize into the body and they wait. They become tension. They become anxiety. They become the specific flatness that is sometimes called depression but is more accurately described as the affective state of a person whose emotional life has been frozen. They become the free-floating irritability of a man who has lost track of what he is actually irritated about. They become the resentment that colors every relationship without ever being named. The anger is there. It is in your shoulders. It is in your jaw. It is in the specific quality of the silence you maintain in certain conversations, the silence that is not peace but held breath. Reclaiming your anger does not mean releasing all of this at once. That would not be reclaiming it. That would be being engulfed by a wave you have not learned to swim in. Reclaiming your anger means beginning a deliberate practice of noticing it before it reaches the suppression stage, learning to catch it early, when it is still information rather than pressure. Here is what this looks like in practice. The next time something happens that makes you uncomfortable, not dramatically, not catastrophically, just the ordinary discomfort of a moment that is slightly wrong, do not immediately move to manage it. Do not reach for the override, the reframe, the generous interpretation that explains it away. Instead, pause, go internal, ask, what is happening in my body right now? Where is there tension? Where is there heat? Is there something in this moment that is registering as wrong? If the answer is yes, do not argue with it. Do not decide it is wrong to feel it. Simply acknowledge, something here has violated something I care about. And then ask, what is it? What is the specific value or boundary or expectation that has just been crossed? This is not a meditation practice. This is not therapy. This is simply the practice of listening to yourself, of treating your own internal responses as data worthy of attention rather than noise to be suppressed. Over time, with repetition, you begin to rebuild the connection to your own inner signaling system. You begin to know in real time when something is wrong, rather than figuring it out 3 weeks later in a journal. You begin to have the information you need to actually respond to your life, rather than just surviving it. And then, And this is where it becomes truly powerful. You begin to learn to express it, not to explode, not to perform, to express. There is a distinction that most people miss between the explosion and the expression. The explosion happens when suppressed emotion reaches a pressure level that exceeds the container. It is messy, disproportionate, and damages relationships because it is not actually about what it appears to be about. It is about everything that was not said before. The person receiving it has no idea how to respond because the explosion is not information, it is overload. The expression is different. The expression happens when a man who has access to his emotional responses says, in real time and in proportion to what actually occurred, "This is not acceptable to me, and here is why." It is clear, it is bounded. It is about the actual situation rather than about everything that has never been said, and it is received completely differently, not as instability, not as threat, but as signal, as information about who this man is and where his lines are. Men who can express their anger cleanly, without cruelty, without performance, without the guilt-inducing hysteria of the suppressed explosion, are not feared for their anger, they are respected for it, because it communicates something that the nice man cannot communicate. I am a person with a structure. I am a person with values. I am a person who knows where the line is, and who will tell you when you have crossed it. That is not dangerous. That is the fundamental minimum requirement for a real relationship. Get your anger back. Not to punish anyone, not to perform toughness, because without it, you are navigating your entire life without a compass, and somewhere deep in you, the part that has been underground all this time knows it. Chapter 5. Silence as Power. The language the weak never learn. Most people talk too much, not because they have too much to say, because they are afraid of what silence means about them. Watch what happens in an uncomfortable moment, a disagreement, a negotiation, a confrontation, a moment when the social temperature rises and the air in the room gets thick. Most people rush to fill it. They talk faster, they over-explain, they hedge, they apologize preemptively. They offer qualifications and caveats and softening language, burying the actual point under so many layers of verbal cushioning that by the time it arrives, if it arrives, it has lost all its force. They are doing this not to communicate. They are doing it to manage anxiety. Their own. Silence, for most people, is not neutral. It is threatening. It carries an implied accusation of inadequacy, of wrongness, of social failure, and so they fill it, reflexively, without thinking, before they have even decided what they actually want to say. What they do not know, what the man who has done this work comes to know, is that silence is not empty. Silence is full. Silence is possibly the most powerful communicative tool available to a human being, precisely because it forces the other person to exist in their own discomfort, rather than having it managed for them. Let us be specific about what silence communicates, because this is important. When you speak too quickly, too much, too apologetically, you communicate several things at once. You communicate that you are uncomfortable and that the other person's comfort matters more than your own. You communicate that you are uncertain of your position. You communicate that you need the interaction to resolve quickly, which means you are willing to resolve it at a cost to yourself. You communicate in the body language of conversation, a form of submission, a lowering of the head, an offering of the throat. When you are silent, genuinely, comfortably, unhurriedly silent, you communicate something entirely different. You communicate that you are not afraid of this moment, that you have considered what you are going to say, and you do not see the urgency to say it before it is ready, that the discomfort in the room belongs to whoever created it, and you are not going to absorb it on their behalf. You communicate in the body language of conversation a form of presence, a steadiness, a groundedness, a sense that this person is not being moved by the weather of the moment. Silence is one of the rarest things in contemporary life, and because it is rare, it carries enormous weight. Consider the difference between these two scenarios. A man asks you for something, a discount, a favor, a concession of some kind. You immediately say something. You explain why it is difficult. You tell him you will see what you can do. You hedge. He hears a maybe that leans toward yes because you are clearly uncomfortable saying no. Now the other version. He asks. You look at him. You say nothing for 3 full seconds. Then you say, no, that does not work for me. Those 3 seconds of silence changed the entire dynamic. They said, I am not afraid of disappointing you. I did not need to rush to fill the space between your request and my answer because I am not managing your feelings. I considered what you said. I decided. Here is my answer. One no lands differently than the other. Not because the word is different, because the person saying it is different. Now expand this. Think about how you currently use silence in your life, or whether you use it at all. Think about the conversations where you talked yourself out of a good position because you could not tolerate the silence that would have held it. Think about the relationships where you filled space that the other person needed to fill, and by filling it, you taught them that you would always be the one who worked harder to maintain ease. Silence as a practice means several things. It means learning to speak only when you have something to say, rather than speaking to manage the room. It means learning to ask a question and then wait, fully, completely wait, without throwing a life preserver into the pause for the answer. It means learning to receive bad news or difficult information or attempted manipulation without immediately responding, giving yourself the space to decide what you actually think rather than what is immediately available. It means learning that you do not owe anyone constant access to your internal processing, that it is not rudeness to think before speaking, that the most powerful things often arrive not in floods of language, but in a single sentence that was held until it was ready. There is a man in almost every human life. You have encountered him, you know who I mean, who does not say much. When he speaks, people listen, not because he is famous, not because he is loud, not because he has credentials that demand attention, but because his words are clearly chosen, because he clearly considered whether to speak at all before he did, because there is no verbal garbage around the point, no apologetic framing, no preemptive softening. There is just the point, clear, solid, unmistakably intentional. That kind of speaking comes from silence. From a man who has become comfortable enough with himself that he does not need to fill every available moment with evidence that he exists. You want to be heard. Every man does. But the path to being heard is not more words. It is fewer, better words, arriving from a place of genuine stillness, in a man whose silence has already told the room something important. I am not in a hurry. I am not afraid. I am exactly where I intended to be. That man, when he speaks, will be heard. Chapter 6. The body is the monster. Physicality, presence, and the temple you neglect. Every idea in this book lives in a body. Not a metaphor of a body, not a spiritual body, a physical one, with a spine and a chest and shoulders and hands and a face that either tells the world you are present or broadcasts, in every micro-expression and postural collapse, that you are not quite sure you have the right to be here. We have spent several chapters in the territory of psychology and emotion and inner architecture, but the inner work does not stay inner. It manifests physically, always. The mind and body are not two separate things with a communication cable between them. They are one system, bidirectional, each continuously shaping the other. What you think changes what your body does. What your body does changes what you think. This means that the reclamation we are discussing cannot be only psychological. It must be physical. It must happen in the body. And the body, for most men who have spent years in the contracted posture of managed smallness, has become the physical record of every compromise, every swallowed word, every moment of self-erasure. Stand up right now, if you can. Stand up and feel what your body is doing. Most men, when they stand without conscious thought, are doing several things. The shoulders are slightly forward, the chest is a little collapsed, the chin is down, or the jaw is held in the specific tension of perpetual readiness to manage. The stomach is gripped, the breath is shallow, the weight is unevenly distributed, slightly forward, slightly tentative, as if the body is perpetually mid-apology, perpetually mid-retreat. This is not posture. This is psychology in physical form. This is the architecture of compliance expressed in flesh and bone, and it communicates. It communicates constantly, without your permission, to every person you interact with. Before you say a word, before you enter a room, your body has already given a presentation, and for most men who have done the kind of suppression we have been discussing, that presentation says, "I am not entirely sure of myself. I am monitoring for your reaction. I am available to adjust." The world reads this. The world responds to it. The world gives you exactly the kind of treatment your body suggests you are prepared to receive. Now, here is what is genuinely stunning about this, and this is backed by decades of research in social psychology and embodied cognition. You can change the inner state by changing the outer form. The relationship is not one-directional. Your body is not just expressing your psychology, it is also creating it. The posture of confidence, held long enough, genuinely begins to produce confidence. The breathing of a calm man, practiced deliberately, genuinely begins to calm the nervous system. The physical occupation of space, not performance, actual occupation, genuinely begins to shift what the mind believes about its right to be in that space. This is not self-deception. This is neuroplasticity. This is the body and the brain doing what they do, which is update based on the information they receive. When your body tells your brain, "We are standing up straight, we are breathing deeply, we are taking up the space we are entitled to," the brain updates its model. It begins to believe it. So, the body, the first physical practice, is the most fundamental. Move toward difficulty rather than away from it. Not as a punishment, as a philosophy. The body that has been maintained in comfort, protected from challenge, avoided exertion and cold and hunger, and the specific aliveness that comes from hard physical effort, that body becomes the physical representation of avoidance, soft in the wrong places, contracted, defended. The body that has been trained to move through difficulty, through the burning of sustained effort, through the cold of the morning run, through the soreness that follows real work, that body develops a relationship with discomfort that is the physical analog of the psychological relationship we have been building throughout this book. It learns that difficulty is not the signal to stop. It learns that the boundary of comfort is not the boundary of self. It learns what it is actually made of, as opposed to what it has assumed in the absence of evidence. You do not need a gym membership and a program and a macro spreadsheet. You need to do something hard with your body, regularly, and to stay in it when it gets uncomfortable. The second physical practice is the one that almost no one talks about, which is the practice of breathing. Your breath is your most direct access point to your nervous system. When you are afraid, your breath goes shallow and moves up into the chest. When you are anxious, it quickens. When you are suppressing emotion, you hold it. You literally hold your breath at the moments when the body wants to express something you have decided not to express. And over time, this becomes habitual. The held breath becomes your baseline. The shallow chest breath becomes your normal. This is not normal. This is a body in chronic low-level fear. Breathing from the diaphragm, deep, slow, from the belly, is the physiological opposite of the fear response. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system. It signals to the body, we are safe, we are in our body, we are not running. And done consistently, this genuinely changes the baseline state. It changes the quality of your presence. People around you feel it, in the specific way that people feel the difference between someone who is in their body and someone who is not. The third physical practice is this: take up your actual space, not more, your actual space. The space you are physically entitled to as a body occupying a point in the physical world. The space that, if you have been practicing smallness, you have been compressing yourself out of for years. Sit with your feet flat and your knees apart, rather than pulled together in the perpetual apology of compression. Let your shoulders rest back rather than rolling them forward in the defensive curl of a person trying to disappear. When you shake someone's hand, make actual contact, full hand, not fingertips, and make it real. Look at the person you are speaking to as a default rather than as an exception. These are not dominance displays. They are the physical language of a person who believes he has the right to be where he is. And here is the most important thing about the body, the thing that supersedes all the practices. When your inner work and your outer form begin to align, when the man you are becoming on the inside starts to be expressed by the body you are inhabiting on the outside, something shifts that is difficult to describe, but impossible to miss. It is felt by others before it is understood by them. It is the specific quality of a man who is fully in himself, not performing confidence, not displaying toughness, but genuinely occupying his own existence with the completeness of a thing that knows what it is. That quality, whatever you call it, is what the training of the inner monster ultimately produces. Not a mask, not a performance, a presence, the kind that does not need to announce itself. Chapter 7. The 7 Faces of Fear, and which one is wearing your name. You are afraid of something, not of the dark, not of snakes, not of the obvious things that wear fear's label openly and without shame. Something more specific, more personal, more architectural, a fear that has shaped the structure of your life in ways you are still discovering. A fear that you may have never named directly because naming it would require looking at it, and looking at it would mean acknowledging its influence, and acknowledging its influence means accepting that much of what you have called choice was actually avoidance. This chapter is about naming it. Fear, when it is not examined, does not disappear. It governs, it organizes your life around avoidance of itself, without ever appearing on the calendar. It disguises itself as preference. You say you prefer not to put yourself out there, you prefer a quiet life, you prefer not to make waves, when what is actually true is that you are afraid, and the preference is constructed to protect the avoidance. There are 7 common forms that the foundational fear takes in men who have not yet done this work. Not 7 fears exactly, 7 faces of a single underlying structure. Each one produces a different life, a different set of compensations, a different flavor of quiet suffering. The first face is the fear of being too much. This is the man who has been told, explicitly or implicitly, in large ways or in the accumulated weight of small ones, that his natural state is excessive, too loud, too emotional, too opinionated, too intense, too much. And rather than continue to experience the social cost of being too much, he has become an expert at being less. He preemptively self-edits. He arrives at gatherings already containing himself, already performing the managed version, already anticipating the moments when his natural expression would exceed what is welcome, and cutting them off before they happen. He is exhausted by social interaction, not because other people drain him, but because he drains himself. He is a river that runs through itself before it runs anywhere else. The second face is the fear of being found out. This is the man who carries a deep, persistent conviction that he is fundamentally inadequate, that his competence, his worth, his intelligence, his value as a person is somehow less than what others believe it to be. He lives in perpetual vigilance, managing the gap between what he fears is true and what he hopes others perceive. Every compliment is a potential setup. Every success is accompanied by a private waiting for the exposure that must inevitably follow. He works hard, often very hard, but not from ambition, from terror. The thing driving him is not desire for what he is moving toward, but dread of what will happen if he stops. This is called imposter syndrome in the popular literature, but that name is too gentle for how it actually operates. It is not a syndrome, it is a worldview, and it produces a specific kind of exhaustion, the exhaustion of a man who has never once believed that the ground he is standing on is solid. The third face is the fear of abandonment. This man makes himself indispensable. He is the most helpful person in every room, not from generosity but from necessity, because his nervous system has learned that people leave, and the best protection against being left is to make yourself impossible to leave. He says yes to things that cost him because the alternative is someone being unhappy with him, and someone being unhappy with him is the first step on the path to someone leaving him, and someone leaving him is the thing around which his entire emotional immune system has been organized since childhood. He has confused love with dependency. He does not feel loved, he feels necessary. And when someone does not need him, he does not know what to do with himself. His worth, in the economy of his own psychology, is entirely conditional on his usefulness. The fourth face is the fear of being ordinary. This is the man who is terrified of irrelevance, who cannot be still because stillness feels like disappearance, who measures his worth by external markers, achievement, status, recognition, the size of his impact. Because without those measurements, he has no other instrument for knowing whether he matters. He chases and chases, and the achievement of each goal brings only a brief respite before the fear returns, because the fear was never actually about the goal. The fear was about the question the goal was supposed to answer: am I enough? And no external achievement can answer an internal question. The fifth face is the fear of genuine intimacy. This is the man who appears emotionally available, but is actually performing emotional availability. He can talk about feelings in the abstract. He can be supportive and present and attentive. But the moment a relationship reaches the depth at which he would have to be seen, fully, without management, without the performance, he retreats. He creates distance through busyness or conflict or emotional unavailability that arrives precisely at the moments when proximity is requested. He wants connection desperately and is terrified of it in equal measure. And the terror wins every time, dressed up as circumstances. The sixth face is the fear of his own power. This is perhaps the most subtle and the most consequential. This is the man who holds back, not from laziness, not from inability, from a deep, often unconscious fear of what will happen if he actually goes all in, if he actually tries, really tries, with everything he has. The fear is specific, that if he gives everything and it still is not enough, then there is no excuse left, no holding back to point to, no unlived potential to hide behind. If he fails having tried fully, then the failure is complete, and so he holds back. He plays at 70%. He keeps a reserve. He stays in the safe zone of almost trying, where failure is always the fault of insufficient effort rather than insufficient self. He will tell you he is waiting for the right moment. He will tell you he is being strategic. He will say many things that are plausible, and none of them will be entirely true. The seventh face is the fear of death, not as a future event, but as an idea. The fear of finitude that produces a man who cannot fully inhabit his own life, because doing so would require acknowledging that it is the only one he has and it is being spent right now. The man who lives half present, always in the future or the past, always in the planning or the reviewing, never quite in the actual moment that contains his actual existence. This fear produces a specific kind of half-life. A man who is technically alive but not yet living. Now, which face is yours? Perhaps more than one, perhaps all of them wear your name in different rooms, but there is usually a primary one, the foundational fear around which the others organize themselves. The one that, if you are honest, has been the organizing principle of too many of your choices. Name it, not to condemn yourself, not to wallow, to know what you are working with, because you cannot train something you cannot see, and you cannot stop being controlled by something you have never admitted controls you. You have named it. Good, now we can work. Chapter 8, the secret chapter. What no one will tell you about becoming dangerous. Stop. This chapter does not appear in any table of contents. It has no number that announces itself. It exists between the known chapters like the gap between heartbeats, a silence that is not empty but full, a pause in which something essential is transmitted. What you are about to read is the thing most people never hear. Not because it is forbidden, because it requires you to already be ready, and most people, at the point in a book like this where such a chapter would appear, are not yet ready. They are still in the territory of the idea, still evaluating the information, still deciding whether they believe it. But if you have come this far, something in you has already decided. So here it is. Becoming powerful does not happen in the moments of decision. It does not happen in the grand dramatic pivots, the declarations, the "I am going to change my life" conversations you have with yourself at 3 in the morning. Those moments matter. They open the door. But what determines whether you actually walk through is something much smaller, much less cinematic, much harder to maintain because it offers no audience and no applause. It happens in the between moments. The moment when you have the impulse to check your phone and you put it down instead and stay with yourself in the discomfort of your own company. The moment when someone says something that diminishes you and your hand goes to the doorknob of your old response. The apologetic laugh, the deflection, the swallowing, and you leave the door closed. The moment when you are tired and the easiest thing would be to stop, and you do not stop, not because you are performing discipline for an invisible audience, but because you have decided that the person you are building is the kind of person who does not stop. Those moments, thousands of them, unobserved, unacknowledged, not even particularly dramatic to live through, that is where it actually happens. Here is the other thing no one tells you. The becoming is uncomfortable in a specific way that sounds like failure if you do not know what it is. When you begin to actually change, not to perform change, not to think about change, but to actually inhabit a different way of being, the people around you will notice, and some of them will not like it. Not your enemies, your friends, your family, the people who love you, because the version of you they loved was, in part, your accommodation, your availability, your willingness to make yourself small when they needed the room. And when you stop doing that, there is a period, sometimes long, sometimes turbulent, in which the relationship has to renegotiate itself, in which the old patterns do not work anymore, and the new ones have not yet been established, in which people who benefited from your compliance will push back against your change, not maliciously, but because change in one person requires change in the system, and systems resist change. You will be called difficult. You will be called cold. Someone will say you have changed, with an inflection that makes it clear they do not consider this a compliment, and you will have to hold the line, not with hostility, with the specific, unruffled steadiness of a man who has decided who he is and does not require the approval of others to continue being it. This is the most important moment in the transformation, because it is the moment where most men fold, where the social pressure and the guilt and the fear of loss become too much, and they return to the old configuration, and they call it choosing relationships over ego, and they believe it. But it is not choosing relationships. It is choosing familiar discomfort over unfamiliar growth. It is returning to the known because the unknown is too uncertain, even when the known is quietly killing you. Here is what is true on the other side of this moment if you hold it. The relationships that survive your becoming are the ones that are real. The ones that require you to stay small were not relationships, they were arrangements. And the difference between a relationship and an arrangement is that a relationship can hold the whole of you, while an arrangement can only hold the edited version. You are not losing the good ones. You are finding out which ones were good. One more thing, the most dangerous secret of all, the inner monster you have been training throughout this book. The thing that was buried, the deep self that was suppressed, the power that was leashed. It is not going to arrive like a revelation. It is not going to announce itself. It is not going to feel, when it is finally integrated, like what you imagined it would feel like. It is not going to feel like power from the outside. It is going to feel like peace, not the peace of someone who has given up. The peace of someone who has stopped fighting himself. The peace of integration, of a man whose surface and interior are the same person, who does not have to manage the gap between who he is and who he is performing, who has stopped spending the enormous energy of self-suppression and now has that energy available for actual life. It will feel, for the first time in a very long time, like rest. And out of that rest, that genuine, bone-deep, no longer at war with myself rest, will come something you did not expect, capability you did not know you had, because you have been spending so much of your capacity on the management of your own suppression that you have no idea how much is left over when you stop, how creative you are when you are not using your creativity to construct elaborate self-containments, how intelligent you are when you are not using your intelligence to anticipate and preempt disapproval, how much physical and emotional and relational energy you have available when you are not spending it on the exhausting full-time project of being acceptable. You are going to surprise yourself, not in the way people mean when they say that, not in the feel-good, discover your potential sense, in the specific, slightly startling, utterly private sense of a man who has been holding his breath for years and finally exhales and realizes in that moment that he has been underwater the whole time and that the surface is right there and that the air is extraordinary. That is the secret. You have been underwater. We are heading toward the surface now. Chapter 9. Discipline is not a cage, it is a cathedral. There is a profound misunderstanding about discipline that lives in the minds of men who have not yet experienced the real thing. They think discipline is restriction. They think it is the suppression of desire, the endless saying no, the joyless management of impulse in service of some distant future goal. They think of it as a cage, and because they already feel caged by their own psychology, by the patterns and fears and accommodations we have been excavating, they resist adding more bars to the structure. They are thinking about the wrong thing. What they are describing, that gray, grinding, self-punishing performance, is not discipline. That is self-punishment wearing discipline's clothing. That is a man who hates himself doing difficult things because he has been told that suffering is the price of worthiness. It is compliance applied to oneself rather than to others. It is the same dynamic, just internalized. Real discipline is entirely different. Real discipline is the practice of building a self that is capable of choosing the harder right thing over the easier wrong one. Not from fear, not from self-punishment, not from the performance of virtue, but from the genuine clarity of a man who knows what he is building and what each small choice either contributes to or costs. It is the opposite of a cage. It is the thing that makes freedom possible. Here is the counterintuitive truth. Freedom without structure is not freedom, it is chaos. It is the freedom of an untrained river which goes everywhere and gets nowhere, which spreads thin over the landscape instead of cutting deep, which eventually stagnates in a delta of its own indecision. The river that has banks, that has been given direction by the shape of the land, does not feel constrained by those banks. It is made powerful by them. The constraint creates the current creates the force. The force is what carves canyons. You have more freedom when you have structure, not less. Think about the men you most admire, not the flashy ones, not the ones who perform their success on a stage, but the ones whose presence in your life has the quality of something enduring and real. Think about what they have in common. Almost certainly, they do things consistently. They have commitments that they keep not because someone is watching, but because the keeping of commitments is part of what they have decided it means to be themselves. They have a practice, physical, creative, intellectual, spiritual, some combination, that they return to regardless of how they feel on any given day. They are disciplined, and they are, almost universally, among the freest people you know. Free in the specific sense of being capable, of not being at the mercy of their moods and impulses and circumstances, of having built, through the consistent application of intention, a self that is more than the sum of its reactions. Discipline is a cathedral because it is built stone by stone over a long time, with the understanding that no single stone is the cathedral, but every stone is necessary. The man who wakes early every morning and does the thing he said he would do is laying a stone. The man who keeps the promise he made when it became inconvenient is laying a stone. The man who sits with the difficult work when the easy escape is available and chooses the work anyway, stone, stone, stone. Over time, the stones become walls, the walls become arches the arches become the interior of something grand and permanent, something that is clearly the work of intention rather than accident, something that announces in every detail that the person who built it knew what he was making. That is what you are making. Not a performance, not a mask, an actual self, something that exists in the same form on Tuesday morning at 5 a.m. as it does on Saturday night, something that is not dependent on favorable circumstances to be what it is, something that can be tested and found consistent. Consistency is the whole game, not intensity, not the dramatic gesture, the life-changing weekend retreat, the powerful insight that reorganizes everything. Consistency, the small, daily, unspectacular return to what you have decided. Here is what this looks like in practice, because we need to land this in specificity. Choose one domain of your life where you have been inconsistent, where your choices have been governed by mood and convenience and the path of least resistance rather than by intention. One domain, not everything at once. Now ask, what would the man I am building do in this domain, consistently, regardless of how he feels on any given day? Write it down, not as a wish, as a decision. Then do it. Tomorrow. Not when you feel ready. You will never feel ready. Tomorrow. At whatever hour you decided, for however long you decided. Without negotiating with yourself, without the elaborate internal committee meeting in which you weigh the merits of doing it today versus doing it better tomorrow, without the performance of deciding not to do it while believing that not deciding is different from deciding. Just do it. And then the next day, and then the next. The first week, it will feel like effort. The second week, it will feel like maintenance. The third week, it will feel like yours. This is not motivational advice. This is how the nervous system works. Repetition changes the neural architecture. Behavior that was once a choice becomes, with enough repetition, closer to an identity. You stop doing the thing because you decided to do it and start doing it because it is what you do. The decision moves from the conscious, deliberate layer, which is expensive cognitively, to the automatic layer, which is cheap. It becomes who you are rather than what you are trying to do. And that shift, from doing to being, is the entire game. The cathedral is not built in a day, but every day you can lay a stone. And the man who lays a stone every day for a year will look back and see something that a year ago was inconceivable, not because of a single monumental effort, because of daily, unremarkable cathedral building discipline. Chapter 10. The Art of Not Being Moved. Emotional sovereignty in a world designed to destabilize you. The world is a machine for producing reactions. Every screen, every headline, every social interaction, every designed environment you move through on a daily basis has been engineered, some deliberately, most through the blind mechanics of what captures attention, to produce a specific kind of instability in the person experiencing it. Outrage, anxiety, envy, fear, the compulsive scroll that chases resolution and never finds it because resolution is not what the machine is designed to produce. Reaction is what it is designed to produce, and reaction keeps you engaged, and engagement is what the machine runs on. You are living inside the largest and most sophisticated destabilization apparatus in human history, and most men have no idea how thoroughly it has colonized their inner life. Emotional sovereignty is not the absence of emotion. It is not the Stoic ideal of the man who feels nothing, who processes the death of his child with the same equanimity he processes a cancelled meeting. That is not sovereignty. That is dissociation. That is a different kind of damage. Emotional sovereignty is the capacity to feel fully and be moved by nothing that has not earned the right to move you. Let me be precise about what that means. When you love someone and they are in pain, you should be moved. When you encounter genuine injustice, you should feel genuine anger. When beauty arrives, real beauty, in nature or music or the specific grace of an honest human moment, you should feel it land. These responses are not weaknesses. They are the evidence of a person who is alive and present and connected to what is real. What you should not be moved by is everything that is merely designed to move you. The manufactured outrage of a news cycle that discovered months ago that anger produces more clicks than information, the social comparison that Instagram runs on, the ambient anxiety that comes from mainlining a continuous feed of the worst things happening everywhere in the world simultaneously, the interpersonal manipulation of people who have learned that your emotional reactivity is leverage. The difference between genuine feeling and manufactured reaction is this. Genuine feeling comes from direct contact with something real. Manufactured reaction comes from something designed to mimic that contact while actually delivering only stimulation. A man who cannot tell the difference is a man who can be played, who will be played, who is, in many cases, already being played by the media he consumes, by the people who have learned his emotional triggers, by his own nervous system which has been conditioned to respond to stimuli that are not actually threats or losses or causes for grief, but that have been packaged to feel like them. Emotional sovereignty is the practice of cultivating the gap between stimulus and response. This phrase, the gap between stimulus and response, has become something of a cliché in personal development circles, but do not let its familiarity rob it of its precision, because it is pointing at something absolutely real. In almost every interaction that costs you something emotionally, in every moment where your reaction makes the situation worse, where you say something you regret, where you are manipulated, where you give away your power to a situation that did not deserve it, there was a moment where a different response was possible. Not the suppression of response, not the management of the expression of a feeling you did not choose, but the genuine, real-time creation of space between what happened and what you do with it. That space is sovereignty. That space is where the man who has done this work lives, not in the reactive layer where most people spend their entire emotional lives, but in the deliberate layer, the layer of choice, the layer that can look at a situation designed to destabilize it and say, I see what this is, I see what it wants from me, and I will decide whether to give it. How do you cultivate this space? Through the same practice of noticing we discussed in the anger chapter, extended to the full range of emotional experience, the practice of becoming a witness to your own inner weather before it becomes your outer behavior. This is not the same as suppression. Suppression is slamming the door on the weather. This is opening a window and looking at it calmly before deciding whether to go outside. In practice, it means several things. It means slowing the response, not because slowness is always correct, but because the reactive response is almost never correct. The message designed to make you angry wants an immediate response. The situation engineered to make you feel inadequate wants an immediate behavioral change. Slowing down, pausing, breathing, waiting until the first wave has passed, degrades the power of manufactured reactions while preserving the ones that are real. It means questioning the source. Before you let something land, before you let a piece of information, a comment, a social comparison, a news story, a manipulative dynamic actually alter how you feel about yourself or your life, ask, what is the source of this? Does it have standing? Has this person or institution earned the right to move me? Not everything deserves the energy of a response. Most things, in fact, do not. And the man who has learned to discriminate, who gives his full emotional attention to what is real and his cool, unhurried non-reaction to what is not, is a man of enormous practical power because he is spending his emotional resources on what matters rather than leaking them into everything. Finally, emotional sovereignty means having a home inside yourself to return to. This is the thing that makes everything else possible. A man who has no stable interior, who has no sense of himself that persists across the variations of circumstance and mood and the opinions of others, has nowhere to retreat to when the world gets loud. He is entirely at the mercy of outside weather because there is no inside. He is defined by what is happening to him rather than by what he has built in himself. The interior home is built through all the practices we have discussed, through the reclamation of anger, through the discipline, through the silence, through the physical inhabiting of the body, through the gradual, patient, unglamorous accumulation of self-knowledge, through the hundreds of small moments in which you acted in alignment with who you are deciding to be, rather than in accommodation to what was easy. That home, once built, is unassailable. You can visit it in the middle of a difficult conversation. You can check in with it when someone's opinion threatens to override your own. You can return to it after a failure and find in it the stable ground that is not dependent on the success having gone differently. This is what emotional sovereignty actually feels like from the inside. Not coldness, not invulnerability, just the specific, quiet certainty of a man who knows where he lives and who, no matter how far the world pulls him, can always find his way back. Chapter 11, The Way of the Monster in Relationships. Love without losing yourself. Here is the thing about relationships that no one wants to say clearly. Most of the relational pain you have experienced in your life, the loneliness inside connections, the drift, the slow loss of passion, the relationships that ended not in drama, but in the accumulated weight of unsaid things, did not happen because of a lack of love. It happened because of a lack of self. You cannot have a real relationship with an incomplete person. Not because incomplete people are unworthy of love. They are deeply worthy of love. But because relationship requires two somethings, and you cannot have a relationship with a performance. You cannot argue with a mirror. You cannot be truly intimate with someone who will not show you who they actually are because they are not entirely sure themselves. The thing you have been building in this book, the reclaimed self, the integrated animal, the man who has access to his anger and his silence and his discipline and his emotional sovereignty, that thing is not just personally valuable. It is the prerequisite for the kind of relationship that most men say they want, and most men have never had. Because the deepest intimacy is not the intimacy of comfort, it is the intimacy of truth, of two people who have each done enough work to have an actual self, and who choose to show that self to each other. Not the performance, not the edited version, the actual interior, the fears and the convictions and the old wounds and the genuine desires and the lines that will not be crossed. That kind of intimacy is not possible between two people who are primarily managing each other's comfort. Here is what changes in relationships when you become the man this book has been building. First, you become capable of genuine conflict. This sounds like a downgrade. It is not. The ability to fight well, to disagree directly, to hold a position under pressure, to say what you actually think when what you actually think is uncomfortable, is not the enemy of intimacy. It is the mechanism of intimacy. Because it is only through genuine conflict, where both people show up as real, that genuine resolution is possible. The relationship that has never had a real fight has also never had real honesty. And the relationship without real honesty is a very elaborate social performance between two people who are fundamentally still alone. You become capable of no, not cruel no, not punishing no, but the clear, real, unhedged no that says, this does not work for me, and I respect you enough to tell you that rather than manage it behind your back. The no that treats the other person as someone who can handle the truth of you. The no that makes the yes mean something. Second, you stop confusing approval with love. The man who has not done this work is, in many relationships, primarily chasing the sensation of being approved of. He has confused this sensation, the warmth of someone's acceptance, the relief of not being rejected, with love. They are not the same thing. Approval is conditional. Love, the real kind, is not. And a man who has only ever experienced conditional approval cannot quite believe in unconditional love when it arrives. He experiences it as a test. He waits for the withdrawal. He sometimes engineers the withdrawal to prove that he was right to wait. When you stop needing approval, when the inner home is solid enough that you are not depending on anyone else to furnish it, something remarkable happens in your relationships. You stop being afraid of them. You stop playing the elaborate defensive games that are necessary when your sense of self is dependent on another person's continued acceptance of you. You become, in the specific sense that matters, free within the relationship rather than imprisoned by it. And paradoxically, this makes you more loving, not less. Because the love that comes from freedom is generosity, and the love that comes from need is manipulation, however kindly intended. Third, you become consistent. The man who has not done this work is different people in different relationships and circumstances. He is the version of himself that he thinks each person wants. He shapeshifts. And this is not just dishonest, it is exhausting, both for him and for the people trying to actually reach him. The man who has done this work is recognizably himself across contexts. The same person with his partner, as with his friends, as with strangers, as when he is alone, not rigid, adaptable in tone and approach, while consistent in character. This consistency is one of the most profound gifts you can offer another person. It is the gift of being knowable, of being someone who can be genuinely depended on, not because you are compliant, but because you are constant. There is one more thing to say about relationships and the inner monster, and it is the thing that is the most important and the most frequently misunderstood. Strength is not hardness. The man who has reclaimed his power, who has his anger and his silence and his sovereignty and his discipline, that man has not become less tender. He has become tender in a way that is real rather than performed. Because tenderness that comes from a man who is complete, who is not desperate for your approval, who is not performing softness as a strategy, that tenderness lands differently. It is not a bid for something. It is not the currency in an emotional transaction. It is simply what it is, a powerful man choosing, in full freedom, to be gentle with someone he loves. That is love from strength, and it is the only kind worth having. Chapter 12. The Monster at Work. Power, ambition, and the refusal to play small. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from spending your professional life in the performance of acceptability. You know what I mean? The meeting where you had the right answer and you softened it into almost an answer because you were not sure the room wanted you to be that right. The negotiation where you left significant value on the table because asking for what you were actually worth felt presumptuous. The opportunity you did not pursue because pursuing it would require a kind of visible ambition that you had been taught, somewhere along the way, was unseemly. The career that is smaller than the person inside it. This chapter is not about professional tactics. There are 10,000 books about professional tactics, and most of them are fundamentally useless because they address the strategy without addressing the self. You can know every negotiation framework, and every leadership principle, and every productivity system, and if the man applying them has not done the work we have been doing, the knowledge will be used in service of the same old pattern, the pattern of staying in the acceptable range, the comfortable middle, the space where he can neither succeed enough to be exposed nor fail enough to be vulnerable. Small, safe, managed. The monster at work is not an aggressive competitor. It is not the man who steps on others to rise. Those men are not powerful, they are terrified, and their aggression is the fear speaking at volume. What we are describing is something entirely different. The monster at work is the man who knows his worth and quotes it without apology. It is the man who, in a meeting where a decision is being made incorrectly, says so, not in the hedged, conditional language of a man who is monitoring the room's reaction to decide how far he will go, but clearly with his actual assessment, with the specific confidence of a person who believes his perspective has value and that offering it honestly is more respectful than managing it into digestibility. It is the man who, when presented with an opportunity, does not immediately calculate whether he is qualified enough, experienced enough, credentialed enough, known enough, but asks instead, is this aligned with what I am building? And if the answer is yes, moves toward it with the full weight of his intention. It is the man who can lose, who can fail publicly and completely and without an excuse that makes the failure smaller, and stand in the field of that failure without collapsing, without the defensive narratives, without the immediate retreat to a smaller arena where failure is less possible, just standing in it, taking in what it has to teach, and deciding what to do next. That is not callousness. That is resilience that has actually been tested, and it is only available to a man who knows, at the level that cannot be argued with, that his worth is not defined by this outcome. Here is something specific about power in professional contexts that most people learn too late. The moment you stop needing the approval of the room is the moment the room starts to need yours. This is not a trick, it is physics. Social dynamics, like all systems, orient towards sources of stability. The man who is clearly grounded in his own assessment, who is not scanning for approval, who speaks from his own position rather than from his reading of what the audience wants to hear, becomes, naturally and without effort, the point around which the energy of the room organizes, not because he performed authority, because he actually had it. The ambition that comes from integrated power is also qualitatively different from the ambition of the unexamined man. The unexamined man's ambition is driven by fear, by the need to prove something to someone, to achieve enough that the internal conviction of inadequacy is finally silenced. This ambition is inexhaustible and never satisfied because it is asking achievements to answer a question that achievements cannot answer. The integrated man's ambition comes from a different place. It comes from the genuine, clean desire to build something, to apply his full capacity to something that matters, to see what he can do when he is not spending half his energy managing the gap between who he is and who he is pretending to be. This ambition has a quality of play about it, of genuine engagement, of a man who is actually interested in what he is doing, rather than using what he is doing to prove something. That second kind of ambition is both more enjoyable and more effective, because it has access to all of you, not just the half that was available, while the other half managed the performance. Stop playing small, not as a pep talk, not as encouragement, but as an instruction derived from everything we have built together in this book. You are not playing small because you lack talent. You are playing small because playing small is the conclusion your conditioned self drew about safety, and you are not actually safe inside it. You are just slowly disappearing. The world does not need another managed, acceptable, professionally palatable version of a man who could have been something. It needs the actual one. Bring him to work. Chapter 13. When the monster fails. Falling, rising, and the alchemy of defeat. You are going to fail. Not might. Not if you take risks. Not as a conditional possibility for the unlucky. You are going to fail. The man being built through these pages, the one who has reclaimed his anger and his silence and his sovereignty and his ambition, that man is going to fail in proportion to how much he engages, which means significantly, which means visibly, which means in ways that cannot be dressed up as something else. This is not a warning. It is a statement of the terms, real engagement with life, the kind that produces real results, real relationships, real experience of your own capacity, is not available without the corresponding exposure to failure. You cannot have one without the other. The life that is small enough to be safe from significant failure is also small enough to be safe from significant anything. So the question is not whether you will fail. The question is what happens when you do. And this specific thing is where the difference between the unexamined man and the integrated one is most visible, not in the success, in the failure, in what the failure does to each of them and who each of them is on the other side of it. The unexamined man experiences failure as identity. It is not something that happened to him. It is something that confirmed what he feared was true about him. It activates the shame, the deep, wordless, physical shame that says, "You see? I told you this would happen. I told you that you were not enough, and now here is the evidence." This shame does not instruct, it punishes, and the response to punishment is not growth, it is contraction. The unexamined man gets smaller after failure. He reduces his scope of ambition to the range where failure is less likely. He builds a smaller life and calls it wisdom. The integrated man experiences failure differently, not without pain, not without the specific sting of a thing not going the way you intended, the disappointment of effort not rewarded, the sometimes public dimension of having been wrong in front of witnesses. He feels all of it. He is not numb, but he has access to something the unexamined man does not. A self that exists independent of the outcome. He knows, not as a concept, but in his body, in the same way he knows his own name, that this failure is not evidence about his fundamental worth. It is information about a specific effort in a specific context at a specific time. It is data, painful, instructive, actionable data, and data can be used. What does the failure tell him? Not about who he is, but about what he did, what assumption was wrong, what preparation was insufficient, what he did not see clearly, what the environment asked for that he did not bring. These are useful things. These are navigational adjustments. These are the difference between a first attempt and a better second one. The alchemist's art, the turning of base metal into gold, is the metaphor that captures what the integrated man does with failure, not denial, not minimization, not the defensive narrative that blames circumstance and protects the ego. A genuine, clear-eyed transformation. The thing that hurt becomes the thing that builds. This requires something that is rare and that must be actively cultivated. It requires the ability to witness yourself without verdict, to look at what you did clearly, without flinching, without the distortions of ego either inflating or deflating the assessment, and see it as it actually was, not better than it was, which is the comfort of denial, not worse than it was, which is the comfort of self-flagellation, which, despite looking like accountability, is actually a way of avoiding it by converting it into punishment and calling the punishment sufficient, exactly as it was. This is the hardest thing, because the mind does not naturally do this. The mind has a bias. It protects or it punishes. The honest witness, the one that sees clearly without the bias, is a trained capacity. It is built through exactly the kind of work this whole book has been describing. The man who can look at his failure honestly, without verdict, and ask only, what is true here and what can I use? That man is nearly impossible to defeat permanently, because defeat to him is instruction, and instruction builds capability. And capability compounded over time is the difference between the man who tried and the man who eventually wins. Elias, you remember Elias, standing in the rain in the opening of this book, shaking with the first 4 seconds of not subtracting himself. Elias failed many times in the year that followed that moment. He set boundaries that crumbled under the first pressure of someone's disappointment. He expressed anger clumsily, too much at once, too long suppressed. He tried to be direct and came across as abrasive because he had not yet found the frequency between his natural instinct and the skill of delivery. He pursued things he wanted and some of them did not materialize. He lost a friendship that could not survive him becoming someone who asked for things. He sat with each failure, not in punishment, in study. And in each failure, he found something, a calibration, an understanding, a place where the next version of himself was slightly sharper, slightly more precise, slightly more completely himself. At the end of that year, he was not the man he had started as, and the failures were not obstacles on the path to that new man. They were the path. Let your failures be the path. Chapter 14, The Man You Were Always Meant to Be, A Final Reckoning. We are at the end, but not in the way endings usually work. Most endings offer you a bow and a return to where you started, an acknowledgement that you have come a long way, a handshake, a send-off into the life you will build with what you have learned. This is not that kind of ending. This is the kind of ending that is actually a beginning, and the only way to honor it is to speak to you with the full directness this whole book has been building toward. So, here it is. Everything you have read in these pages points toward a single truth that is simple to state and radical to embody. The man you were always meant to be is not somewhere in the future. He is not dependent on circumstances aligning. He is not waiting to emerge after one more year of work, one more book read, one more insight integrated. He is present right now. He exists in the same moment as the words you are hearing. And the only distance between you and him is the distance between who you are currently pretending to be and who you actually are. That distance is made of specific things we have named in this book. The anger you are not expressing, the silence you are not inhabiting, the space your body is not occupying, the no you have not yet said, the ambition you have not yet pursued, the failure you have not yet risked, the self you have not yet fully shown to anyone, including yourself. Each of these is a distance, and each of them can be closed, not in a single dramatic gesture, but in the ordinary moments of an ordinary day by a man who has decided that the distance is no longer acceptable. I want to tell you something that I have been building toward since the very first word of this book. The world does not actually want you to be small. I know it sometimes seems that way. I know the social machinery seems calibrated to reward accommodation and punish difference. I know the voices, inside and outside, that tell you that your power is the problem, that your depth is too much, that the appropriate human being is a managed, careful, quiet one who takes up exactly the approved amount of space. But look around at the people you actually admire. Look at who moves you. Look at who you tell stories about. Look at who has affected your life in ways that lasted, in ways that genuinely changed the trajectory of something in you. I promise you, it is not the managed ones, it is not the careful ones, it is not the ones who showed you only the approved surfaces. It is the ones who were so fully themselves that being in their presence felt like an expansion of what was possible. The ones whose depth gave you permission to have depth. The ones whose courage to be exactly what they were made you question, for the first time, why you were being something else. The world is made better by people who are fully themselves, not by loud people, not by aggressive people, not by people who have confused dominance with depth, by fully integrated ones, people whose outer life and inner life are the same life, who have done the difficult work of honest self-examination and come out the other side with something solid and real and completely, irreducibly their own. That is the monster in the title of this book. Not a creature of darkness, not a thing of fear, but the deep, unmanaged, fully integrated truth of a human being who has stopped running from himself and started becoming himself. The specific, rare, genuinely threatening thing, threatening to mediocrity, threatening to comfortable lies, threatening to the systems that depend on your compliance, of a man who has decided to be actual. Actual is the most dangerous thing you can be, and it is the only thing worth being. The work does not end here. It does not end anywhere, actually, not because you will always be broken, but because growth does not have a terminal point. There will always be more to reclaim, more to refine, more of the self to come into contact with. The man who thinks he has finished this work has simply reached the horizon and forgotten that horizons move. But there is something that ends here, the period of not knowing. You know now. You know what was buried and why it was buried and what it costs to leave it buried. You know the mechanisms of your own compliance. You know the faces of your fear. You know what discipline actually is and what anger is actually for, and what your silence can do when you learn to inhabit it. You know what the monster in the basement has always been. Not a monster at all, but the most alive thing about you, locked away by people who confused your wildness with danger, when it was actually the signal. The signal that you were here, that you had depth, that you were worth knowing. Go be worth knowing, not for anyone else, not as a performance, not as a project to display, as the simple, private, daily practice of a man who has decided to stop being absent from his own life. Elias in the rain refusing to move, that was not a grand gesture. It was 4 seconds. It was one man standing still in the cold, while the world arranged itself around him. You can do that. You can stand still in whatever rain is currently falling on you. You can let the world arrange itself. You can refuse one moment at a time to subtract yourself from your own existence. And if you do that, if you hold that refusal, not in the dramatic moments, but in the ordinary ones, not when the audience is watching, but when no one is, not when it is easy, but especially when it is not, then the thing we have been calling the inner monster will not remain below. It will rise, not with violence, with the specific, unmistakable gravity of a man who is finally, completely, irreversibly himself. That is the end, and that is the beginning. Extended meditation. The 1,000 Small Wars. There is something important that was not yet said between the chapters, something that lives in the connective tissue of this whole journey rather than in any single chapter's argument. The transformation described in this book is not one battle, it is 1,000 small wars, fought in the unglamorous interiors of ordinary moments, against an opponent who knows you better than any external enemy ever could. Because the opponent is the oldest version of you, the conditioned one, the one who learned compliance as survival and now defends that learning with extraordinary creativity. Every time you begin to change, the old self fights back. Not always obviously, not always in the form of resistance you can name. It fights back through the sudden appearance of very good reasons to return to the old pattern, through the voices that sound like wisdom but are actually fear, through the exhaustion that arrives precisely at the moment when the new behavior is demanded, through the stories, so plausible, so internally consistent, that explain why today is not the right day, why this particular situation is the exception, why the person you are becoming can begin tomorrow with a cleaner slate and better conditions. The old self is not stupid. The old self is a master strategist. It has had your entire lifetime to learn your specific vulnerabilities, and it will use them, with precision and without mercy, at the exact moment of maximum leverage. You have to know this going in, because the men who begin this work and do not sustain it, and they are the majority, as they always are, which is not a judgment but a fact about the difficulty of the work. Those men do not fail because they lacked commitment when they started. They fail because they were surprised by the sophistication of the internal resistance. They thought transformation was about learning new things. It is actually about defeating very old ones, repeatedly, in the same ordinary moments, without the adrenaline of a major decision to fuel you. The major decisions are the easy ones, the ones where the stakes are high and the moment is dramatic and there is a clear before and after. Those, paradoxically, are less important than the small ones. The moment in a Tuesday afternoon when no one is watching and nothing is at stake and the old behavior is available and the new one costs something modest but real. The moment when the smallest version of the old pattern offers itself and you have the option to take it or not. Those moments, accumulated, are the transformation, not the decision to change. The Tuesday afternoons. There is another dimension to this that the chapter structure of any book necessarily obscures. The dimensions of this work do not arrive in sequence. You do not master anger, then move on to silence, then complete discipline, then add emotional sovereignty. They arrive simultaneously, in varying degrees, creating interference patterns with each other. The work on anger changes how you experience silence. The discipline changes your relationship with failure. The emotional sovereignty changes what your relationships are capable of. Everything affects everything, which means the journey is not linear. It is not a staircase. It is more like the ocean, multi-dimensional, non-sequential, with sudden depths appearing in territory you thought you had already covered, with the same lessons arriving again in more advanced forms when you thought they were finished. The man who thought he had resolved his relationship with approval will meet it again at a higher altitude, in a more subtle form, when the stakes are larger and the cost of the pattern is more significant. This is not failure. This is how depth works. The spiral staircase, not the ladder. You return to the same themes, but higher, with more capacity, with a better view of the landscape below, and a clearer sense of what is above. Every version of you that has read this far is a version that is capable of more than the version that began it. Not because the words were magic, because the act of honest engagement with your own interior, the willingness to look at the architecture of your own compliance, the courage to name your fear, the audacity to believe that the thing in the basement is worth recovering, changes something. In the reading, in the listening, in the moment when something in you said, yes, that is it. That is what I have been circling. That recognition is not the destination. It is the departure from the managed half-life, the departure from the pleasant, available, conflict-averse performance, the departure from the comfortable smallness that has been eating you alive so quietly you almost forgot to notice. There is a life available to you that is not this one, not because this life is bad, but because it is not fully yours. It has been assembled by committee, by everyone whose opinion you needed, whose approval you sought, whose disappointment you could not bear. It is a life shaped by everything except your own deepest, most honest, least managed sense of who you are and what you are here for. That other life is not waiting in a different city or a different relationship or a different career. It is waiting in the same body, the same day, the same ordinary moment you are in right now. It is waiting for you to stop managing it and start living it. One decision at a time, one Tuesday afternoon at a time, one moment of standing still in the rain at a time. The monster has always been there. It was never the problem, it was always the answer. A note on men who have come before you. Before this book concludes entirely, one more thing must be said. You are not the first man to have buried the best of himself under the weight of what was required to survive his own formation. You are not the first man to have looked up one day and realized that the person he had become was a carefully constructed stranger, someone assembled for palatability rather than truth. You are not the first to have felt the specific vertigo of looking at your own life and seeing the shape of someone else's design rather than your own. This has happened to men across every era, every culture, every tradition. The names change, the specific mechanisms of suppression change, the particular fears that are installed, and the particular behaviors they produce vary across time and context. But the fundamental movement, from alive to managed, from actual to acceptable, from the raw truth of a person to the polished performance of one, is as old as civilization itself, and so is the movement back. In every tradition that has thought seriously about what it means to be a human being, there is a thread that runs beneath the surface of the official teachings, a thread that understands that the deepest work is not the addition of virtue to an empty vessel, but the removal of what was laid over the truth. Not becoming something new, but returning to something original, not construction but excavation, not adding light to the darkness, but removing what has been covering it. The Stoics called it living according to nature, not nature in the sentimental sense, but in the sense of your actual constitution, your genuine character, the specific shape of the self that you actually are, rather than the self you have been trained to present. The Buddhists speak of Buddha nature, the quality of awakened awareness that is not achieved but uncovered, that is not gained but recognized, that was always present but has been obscured by the accumulated debris of conditioning and fear. Many indigenous traditions describe the initiation as a return. The young man does not go out into the wilderness to find something he does not have. He goes out to meet himself in a setting stripped of all the social scaffolding that normally stands between him and that encounter. The monster he meets in the dark is himself, and the test is not to defeat the monster, it is to recognize it, to say, I know you, you are not the enemy, you are the self I almost forgot. The work in this book is part of a very long tradition of men doing the hardest and most necessary thing available to a human being, turning toward their own truth and staying with it long enough to find out what it is. You are not alone in this work. You are, in some sense, in a vast and unbroken lineage of men who chose the actual over the comfortable, the difficult over the managed, the full life over the safe approximation of one. That lineage is behind you, and the men who come after, the ones your example will quietly, invisibly, irreversibly shape, they are ahead of you. Stand in that lineage with your full weight, with your real presence. The world needs fewer managed men and more actual ones. Be actual. The monster speaks. A final word in the voice of what was buried. I have been down here for a long time. You built the walls yourself. I want you to know that I understand why. The world is not kind to what is unmanaged in a person, and you were young and the social cost of being fully yourself was real, and the accommodation felt survivable even when it did not feel like living. I understand the calculus. I made no judgment about it, even as the walls went up. But I want you to know what it has been like down here while you were up there performing. It has not been dark. That is the first thing. People think suppression creates darkness, but it does not. What it creates is a kind of suspended state, a very long breath held, a very long pause in a sentence that has not yet finished. I have been waiting, not in anguish, but in the specific patience of something that knows it is true and therefore knows it cannot ultimately be contained. Truth does not despair, it waits. I have watched you from below. I have seen the moments when you almost came down, the night after the relationship ended in that particular quiet way, and you sat alone and felt the full weight of what it is to have been present without being real. I felt you close then. You reached toward me without knowing it. And then the morning came and the managing resumed and the distance reasserted itself. I waited. I watched the career decisions, the ones you made from fear when something inside you was pointing in a completely different direction, pointing towards something that would have been harder and more exposed and more completely yours. I wanted to tell you the exposed thing is not the dangerous thing. The unexpressed thing, that is the dangerous one. What you leave unlived does not disappear. It becomes the specific quality of your regret. I am not angry at you. I want to be clear about that. What I feel, if feeling is the right word for what happens in the place where buried things exist, is something closer to anticipation. Because you are here, you have come far enough to read to the end of a book that was always about me, about this, about the reclamation, and that means something. Not everything, but something. It means the wall has a door now, and the door is open. Come down when you are ready, or do not come down. Come up. Bring me with you into the light of your actual life, where I was always supposed to be. I am not a monster. I am you. The part of you that was never wrong about anything, only ever inconvenient to others. The part of you that knew when something was wrong, before your mind had permission to acknowledge it. The part of you that felt the pull toward things that were genuinely yours, the work, the love, the life, before the second guessing arrived and made them smaller. The part of you that has been patient for years and is still patient and will be patient for as long as it takes, because it knows something the scared surface of you has not yet fully accepted. There is no version of your life that is good without me in it. There is no relationship worth having that can only accommodate the performance of you. There is no ambition worth pursuing if the person pursuing it is not actually here. I am here. I have always been here. Come home. Go. The door is open. The light is yours. Walk through it like you own every inch of what is on the other side.